welcome to episode 34, apparently, of Cybeats Powerhouse Perspectives. I'm Chris Blask. I'm the Vice President of Strategy with Cybeats, and with me today is the great Stephen Northcutt. Stephen, how are you?
Better than I deserve.
Right? Aren't we both? You know, we can't go down that, what we actually deserve path because it might be bad luck. You might start something. So thanks for being here. And as we said, we were talking about it in the green room before this, right? So this is sort of a conversation. You've had this fascinating path. You know, we tend not to, dig into LinkedIn's and so forth. People can look people up, but everybody, who's having these conversations are remarkable folks. And you've had a remarkable career, and you kind of left that one and moved on to the other one and doing other interesting things. But throughout, that time, since you got into this and got, the whole SAMS path and so forth, Anthony, if you can roll that first question, looking back, the transparency and clarity in education, what is more, pertinent, to cybersecurity and the information security and the information in people's heads. So, I think of this as a question, you can start anywhere you like with this, but when you got into the business of sharing information, sharing knowledge and training and so forth, how, what was that like and how has it changed over time?
Well, if it's okay, I'd like to start by leveling the playing field of the history.
Sure.
It turns out that the oral tradition had very big limits to how much information could be passed on from one generation to the other. Writing was a big deal. And then we had a funny thing. The ancient cultures were able to teach science, but they always did it mystically. In the Dark Ages, the church separated from the secular skills, and that's still true today. But the interesting thing is information has been largely secret, right? And then we get up to guilds, right? You can't share the information. And then we reach the cyber point. And how do you think that's affected you as open sharing starts to happen?
Right. And of course, I generally embrace that sort of thing, most of my life now, the open source, open free speech, open democracy, in business, over and over again, thinking, all right, yes, I have the responsibility to grow value and so forth. However, I think that can be done better with more openness. But not so open your bloody brain falls out. But you strike on one of my favorite things, because as cyber folks, we're like, oh, this is all new. And reality is this has been going on by, thousands of years, depending on how you count what this we're talking about. So how we teach and share information now, and this is why, thinking about this conversation with you, the time we have and you have straddled with this, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and 40 years ago, these are dramatically different times, more so than almost any time in history. On this topic, how is information shared and protected, and what is secret and what's worth being secret?
Right. Well, in terms of the teaching part, for me, 1998 was a really important year because I was gifted a chance to go to Usenix, and they threw in 2 one-day courses. So I had Perl programming from Tom Christensen, and I was able to hang with him till about lunch. And then after lunch, there was only one guy from a university and him, and they were having a conversation back and forth. That was it, right? I also got a send mail with Eric Allman, and I made it about an hour and a half. And I was the postmaster for a Navy lab. So I learned that you can't send the information out, but it's such a fast speed. You've got to slow it down. So when the SANS experience, we quit doing the one days, and we started seeing, how many days it takes to cover a topic thoroughly. For some reason, I have no reason understanding why it turned out to be 6. Most of the complicated topics ran about 6 days. So we gave it 6 days, and that was our key to success.
Well, I love to reference the Samuel Coleridge factoid. Right around 1800, it became impossible to actually know everything. Too much to know, too much to read, right? And that's throughout the 20th century, that's a sort of marker. And I think one of the defining markers in our time is that I can't keep up with my own field. Nobody can. Things move too fast. And either that inevitably leads to failure states or whatever, or it inevitably leads to some other paradigm. And the 6 days, I like that. So I think that's about right. because it's not an arbitrary number. I said 6 minutes, 6 hours, 6 days, 6 months, 6 years. 6 months and 6 years are big long ones beyond our personal horizons. And the 6 hours and 6 minutes, you only go so far. 6 days is probably about accurate, for that body of knowledge, which isn't all of it, can't be, but enough to take functionally away. It sounds like a very human time scale. So where to go from there with that? With the 6 day paradigm, I love that, because I think some of those things may not change, right? It may always take about that long, to get that much information across. Anthony, am I frozen? I think I'm frozen. I think it's Orlando having problems, really post hurricane mess.
Yes.
Oh.
One of the things that I think is going to work for us as we're going forward is the concept of matching the computer-based training with mentoring. I see this in business all the time. Is somebody goes to Harvard and gets their MBA, and they come in and they have a set of skills, or somebody gets their CPA and they have a set of skills when they come in. But that CPA doesn't come in prepared not to tick off one of his high net value customers, right? That CPA has to be mentored in that sort of a way. And I think that with the complexity of information security, the notion of somebody teaching 6 people or 12 people for a couple of hours, them going back and doing the computer-based training is the way of the future. I just signed up for Babbel, the Spanish language Babbel program. I learned more in a month at Babbel than I learned in 2 years in college. So
it's, you think about, like I said earlier on, I love looking back in history, and it's easy to get confused with things because everybody's always living in the present. But, a blacksmith in the 1700s did not know the molecular structure of, any mechanic with a tool in their hand doesn't know every atom, every plane, and there's tolerances, and they're always having it. And, the fact that we can keep doing these complicated things we do, when there's more and more information to know, isn't really new. I mean, maybe we're backing off a little bit of trying to say that we can understand everything in a given field. And to your point, you get some good training, learn something. There's a human factor, mentoring. How do you put this to work? Which, looking back a thought, maybe takes about a week, right? That may be a static state. Maybe that's how humans work. Okay, Anthony, roll that second question. Where are we in the present? It was something really intelligent, I'm sure. Have we made it hard to learn, right? And again, these questions are just meant to instigate things. I don't really have an opinion on this or not, but here we are right now. 20 years ago, here we are right now. Disinformation, misinformation, is the public forum, education, secondary education, post-secondary education is been coming to an evolution anyways, in colleges and universities and online learning and vocational learning. Where are we? Better, worse, interesting? What do you think?
I think we're a step sideways. There's more to learn, and the things that you learn through a screen, we're becoming adept at. Going back to the history, right? The oral tradition, people learn to listen through their ears, and that's how they learned, what they heard in their ears, right? And then with writing, people were learning with their eyes to some extent, right? Now we're learning with all of the above through a screen, which only applies to some things. I had a Mustang GT 5.0 that needed a battery changed. And I opened up the hood, confident that I could do it. And always in my life, there was only a holder of the battery and a black and a red terminal. No. It's like, what are all these wires coming out of the battery? So I went and looked at a YouTube video. It's kind of like the Matrix when they download those programs of how to fly a helicopter, right?
Right.
I looked at the YouTube video and went out and bought a tool that you needed to get it to work and got it done, right? So that's a big change in the screen language. But you brought up the example of a blacksmith able to make a horseshoe without knowing the molecular structure. And there is an area that we have a bit of a problem coming forward, is the things that you don't learn from a screen. You don't learn fishing, you don't learn hunting, you don't learn trapping, right? There's a lot of things you don't learn from a screen, and you don't see the moms and dads teaching those things as much anymore. So a set of skills that we've had through the entire time that humanity has walked the earth are going to be disappearing at a high rate of speed.
Well, and this is, again, one of the things that gives me hope is these resonance over history, right? And coming from, a manufacturing background before I got into computers at all, and, looking at operational technology all this time and critical infrastructures and so forth. And, you and I have talked boats a lot, right? These criticalities that force you into parsing out what is of the current new stuff worth actually using and what is, to be really clear, not, right? And, with my kids all being 20 something now, right? Watching this, how does this generation coming along past me adopt this stuff? You touched on one of my favorites. I remember with my son when he was a teenager, my oldest, changing the brakes on a car and doing the same thing. It's like, I can just show you. It's like, but there was a bolt in a place, and it was like, that's one I just, oh yeah, but on YouTube, and now we're used to that. I know kung fu now, right? I know enough to do this thing. But critical infrastructure, these other disciplines, maintain that historic thread because, no, you're not plugging that into my hydroelectric dam that was built 80 years ago and has been running fine, not without going through these processes. So I like the way you said that. We've taken a step sideways. There's a lot to be said. We all see it all the time, but we're still a little concerned. Can we tie it all together, right?
Right. There's one of the famous sci-fi genre ideas is they're dependent upon a technology they do not understand because it came from a different race or a different set of generations.
Right. Or invent electric monks, for the Dirk Gently fans out there, a robot that will believe things for you, because that's actually complicated too. But Anthony, what is our looking into the future question for today? So, thinking about that, will we be able to know the truth? This is something that you and I, and all of our peers discuss a great deal, in our own conversations going on. Misinformation, disinformation, influence campaigns, on top of all this other stuff. All these challenges to having knowledge, sharing knowledge, educating, the veracity of knowledge, identity. God help us all. I think you know my new normal optimism. What do you think? Do we get through this? Can we come back to having, not the, the utopian view of truth that never exists, but enough to keep functioning?
Well, Pontius Pilate said it best. What is truth? Right? Now, that senator in the movie The Shooter, he goes, the truth is what I say it is. Right? That's a little bit scary. So I had an experience in 1999 working as the chief for information warfare in a Pentagon agency. And it was a really good time to be there because we were just transitioning from the dropping leaflets that say you have no chance to moving into the digital world, right? And what we were doing then was fairly clumsy compared to what we're doing now, right? Now, please don't get me wrong. People throughout history have always believed things that were not so. We're not provable. We're not possible, right? And they always will. It's the human frailty factor, right? The thing that's changed is the speed and intensity it happens. This going viral is what's new.
Well, exactly. It's those resonant themes. As we're talking about earlier, it's not 6 minutes or 6 days, 6 hours. Something takes 6 days. And someone, I mentioned a Facebook comment, I think, just before this, in between calls. My first virus was the Good Time virus. And it was delivered, by the internet, by Usenet, everybody's email box. It displayed the code. It was processed, input into the eye, processed by the brain, and made you move your fingers and share it. And, the conversation, of course, I spent a great deal of time with Fred Cohen these days, who's right there at the beginning of the antivirus. And at the time I'm saying, I think this is a virus. It's like, no, kid, you don't know what you're talking about. This is just a scam. It's a hoax. I was like, no, this is a virus. This is what viruses do. And now we're in this world where there's tuned campaigns and timing and, mass micro targeting demographics and so forth, and very little defenses, right? So My normal inevitability curve optimism says, okay, extreme states are not static. That we have to evolve methods of dealing with this one way or the other. And I think I see some of the threads of this in threat intelligence, information sharing, supply chain, the stuff that my day job, Cybeats, our sponsor here. If I have to be clear to you, and you're a nuclear agency or somebody running a nuclear reactor, on exactly what's in something, the information inside something, I have to build mechanisms to do that. And if Moore's law keeps being on our side, we should be able to take, I think, some of these mechanisms to build enough shared truth that we're not such easy targets. Because threat actors, just like in the cyber, the literally running on silicon cybersecurity world, threat actors aren't on your side. Even if they're doing what you want, you're just a tool. None of us like being tools.
Well, back to your worm, the good times virus, the paper that really hit me between the eyes the most in the 90s was the paper that postulated the existence of a Warhol worm, the 15 seconds of fame, and claimed that it could be, this is of course pre-Service Pack 2 Microsoft Windows. But when it actually happened, it was amazing, right? The paper comes out and 2 months later, the virus comes out. And so you have to ask yourself today, how does the Warhol worm apply to knowledge, right? And so how fast can you actually get in 15 seconds, how many people can you suddenly persuade something is true or false? And I've been playing with these text to prompt things, Midjourney version 4, and Deep Dream Generator. And this morning I was preparing for a very expensive meeting I'm making next week, where I'm hiring consultants for a retreat center. And these are all high dollar people. And so I was just mid-journeying up, bunkhouses that look like trains and whatnot. And it was making fairly clumsy, but enough for the meeting representations, right? But 2 million people are using it. What is it going to be able to do in a year, right? You'll be able to have a picture of somebody, and you won't, that was fabricated, but it'll be hard to tell the difference. They say the deep fakes can be figured out, but I don't know. There's these things that just get better and better.
Well, I took my first boss in the space, John Alsop, came up with a border idea when I was working for him. He told me certain things at the time. I thought in the early 90s that television would be going in 5 years. And John's like, let me explain the logistics to you, the factories and manufacturing of content. And he was totally right. We're still getting rid of TVs now, 30 years later. But, I got to talk to somebody, with great deals of experience, like, you and arguably me at this point. And he said, the internet's not going to work. There's not enough IP addresses, right? So me and Amaya El Gundy and Andrew Flint invented network address translation 10 minutes later. And 2 other teams did it at the same time, all at the same time. And what John said to me is, whenever there's enough demand for something and it's a technical issue, the technical solution is always found, always. And I think this is such a gestalt need for all of us. It's nothing to do with what you believe or anything else. We all would like to not be wrong all the time and not be manipulated. So again, I know my bias working in the areas that I work in, but I think, again, if we can do these things for supply chain security and threat intelligence and managing IP and coordinating well enough at those speeds and scales, that we could do the same thing for human information too.
Some blockchain sort of implementation.
Who knows? That's right. Distributed ledgers, blockchain is the B word. I don't know. It makes people crazy.
The flip side, though, is there are some things that are true, that science has made just huge leaps. The James Webb Telescope, right? There's so much information coming out. Gene editing, right? We're in an amazing time. I hooked up a TV. You mentioned TVs a second ago. I got one of those Amazon Fire TVs yesterday morning, and getting on the wall was a trick, but 75-inch TV on the wall. But once we got it on the wall, it was so easy to program, get it started, and what it can do, there's a million truths, a million repeatable experiments and processes baked into a product like that.
Well, I just this morning ordered a Roku projector. The little projector. I've got the first water cannons for the boats, and I wanted to do this since we started doing this. So just like Disney does, he's have a water spray at night and you project the video into it, but out on the ocean, right? Because you can. And to your point, I don't have to I just plug it in and configure things and like, a screwdriver and some wrenches, you can do anything these days. So we're likely to figure out this too. I don't know. It's nice to live in the Pacific Northwest, enjoy the trees and so forth. Or live in Florida, enjoy the dolphins, and everybody really wants the same general, things at the end of the day. And gosh darn it, we will have them. So I just want to thank you for everything you've done all the time, for the industry, as a friend, and an open voice, willing to speak your mind all the time, and joining us here today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Stephen. Thanks, everyone.